Now, another aspect of the miraculous nature of the Qur'an is its preservation. The Arabs, they didn't have paper, of course. The Egyptians had papyrus. There was nothing like that. But the Arabs had, they didn't have clay tablets. The only things they had were some wood, leather, parchment, and that was not in abundance. Stones. Those are the things that the Qur'an was written down on. And despite that, it was authentically preserved. You have something like Shakespeare's folios, and the accuracy of their preservation is contested. And it was like 400 years ago or 500 years ago, and who exactly wrote Shakespeare's plays is something that's also a matter of dispute. Now, the fact that the Qur'an was preserved by tawatur makes it something that, it's like, are you sure that President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas? Were you there? Did you see it? No, you weren't there and you didn't see it, but so many people saw it and so many people were there, and it's been transmitted by such a huge number that it's impossible that they could have all gotten together and said, made up a lie, and that John Kennedy is secretly alive and well and living in Florida. It's impossible. So, likewise, the Qur'an was memorized by so many people that what we have with us is what was being recited by the Prophet ﷺ. And the attempts by people like John Wansborough, who is the head of the Oriental African Studies Department or School at University of London, and his theory that the Qur'an didn't really come about until a couple hundred years after the Prophet ﷺ. And he has students who have carried on his claims. It's just absurd. And you have this. There was an article that was written in Atlantic Monthly about this masjid in Yemen. This really, really old masjid, and they were cleaning out the attic, and they found sacks and sacks worth of these old scraps of Qur'an, and there are these subtle differences between some of the wordings on these scraps and the accepted wording today. This whole article in Atlantic Monthly, which came out around 96, 97, it didn't cite a single example. And so, what exactly are the differences? We already know that there's slight variations in recitation. Any Quranic TAFSIIR will give them to you, and they're well preserved, in these books of recitation. So, it's as far as I could tell from the article, my reaction when reading that Atlantic Monthly article was, "Where's the beef?" You didn't bring a single item of proof. You just had some quotes from some people who are supposed to be experts, and they're hostile witnesses. So, show us your proof. So then, going back to this, the verse, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, will they not ponder on the Qur'an? وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If it had been from other than Allah, they would have found in it much inconsistency. Now the word there is اختلاف. اختلافًا. Okay, it's in the accusative case, mansub. Now some people, they said, that very word اختلاف occurs in the Qur'an 7 or 8 different times. And so, they want to be nitpicky about it. Yeah, we found ikhtilaf in the Qur'an more than once. The word ikhtilaf. Okay, but if you're going to be nitpicky about it, then let's get nitpicky with you. Okay, all the other forms of ikhtilaf are either marfu or mansub. It only appears marfu or majroor with a dhamma or a kasra, tanween, dhammatain or kasratain. And the only place that it appears mansub with an alif is in that verse. So, ikhtilafan only appears once in the Qur'an. Now, there's some people who have specialized, in our time, they put up these websites that are talking about supposed contradictions in the Qur'an. So I'd like to go through some of those and show how the accusation doesn't add up. One of the things that looks like there's something to it at first, he talks, this critic, he talked about the verses of inheritance, and it mentions specific amounts for different people. And so there's a particular case where the amounts won't add up. If the deceased left a husband and 2 paternal sisters, well, the share of the husband should be 1/2, and the share of 2 paternal sisters would be 2/3. And so 1/2 is 6/12, 2/3 is 8/12. That's 14 shares out of 12. So that looks like a contradiction, right? Well, the thing to understand about Qur'an is that it's very compressed. So the rules of inheritance are present in about 3 different verses, basically. There's a couple of others, but they're abrogated. And so you have 3 basic verses on inheritance, 11 and 12 in Surah An-Nisa, and then the last verse of Surah An-Nisa. And then you have a few hadiths that fill in and guide us. So, for instance, the hadith that says those people who have fixed shares should be given their fixed shares, and then what remains goes to the nearest male relative. And if there are children, and especially if there are sons, then there will never be this situation that we just described. So in the somewhat rare occurrence of there being no surviving sons, then you will have certain situations where there will be more shares than the total inheritance. And this came up not during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, but during the lifetime of Omar. A case, if it wasn't this case, it was something similar. And so, it was a pretty straightforward solution. 6/12 and 8/12 makes 14 out of 12. So instead of having a denominator of 12, you convert the denominator to 14. And so you have 6/14 and 8/14. And the thing about this type of inheritance is that when it was studied systematically, it was found that there were certain situations when the denominator is 6, where you have this overflow, and when the denominator is 12, when the denominator is 24, you have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You have 8 situations where you have this overflow. There's more shares than the total inheritance. Now the Qur'an, the nature of the Qur'an is that it gives general rules. And it doesn't tend to go into vast detail. I mean, the verses of inheritance are more detailed than most of the verses of the Qur'an. And now, if it was to go into all these 8 cases, and etc., it would make for very tedious reading. And the Prophet ﷺ showed the Muslims that ijtihad is something that's required of them. And so the nature of the Qur'an is not to dot every I and cross every T. It gives you the basic rules and then trusts in the intelligence of the believers to figure out and make adjustments in unusual cases. And so, I mean, this didn't cause any crisis of confidence or faith among the Sahaba. I mean, it's a simple problem, and they dealt with it. And it was a pretty obvious extrapolation from the text, and it became a matter of consensus. That that's the way to deal with this situation among the Muslims who came afterwards. If you look at, we don't have time to go into a lot of these, but let me do a couple more. What will be the food for the people in hell? Okay, you have 3 different verses. لَيْسَ لَهُمْ طَعَامٌ إِلَّا مِنْ ضَرِيعٍ. No food will there be for them but bitter thorn fruit. ضَرِيعٍ. The verse goes on to say, which does not nourish nor release from hunger. That's in Surah Al-Ghashiyah, verses 6 and 7. And then in Surah Al-Haqqa, talking about people of hellfire, people who get their book in their left hands. ولا طعام إلا من غسلين فليس له اليوم هاهنا حميم ولا طعام إلا من غسلين لا يأكله إلا الخاطئون. But as for him who's given his record in his left hand, etc., etc., there's various verses, and then it gets to nor has he any food except the corruption from the washing of wounds and pus, which none but sinners eat. And then you have a passage in Surah Al-Dukhan, إن شجرة الزقوم طعام الأثيم كالمهل يغلي في البطون كغلي الحميم. That this tree of al-Zaqum is the food of the sinful. And Muhammad Amin al-Shinqiti wrote a whole book on, it's a pretty small book, but it's a book, on reconciling these apparent contradictions between various Quranic verses. And he summarized what scholars had to say about that in 2 answers. The first is that there are different categories of people in hell, and so different categories of inmates of hell will get different types of food. Some will only get tariq, some will get ghislin, and others will get zaqum. And support for that interpretation can be found in Surah Al-Nahl, Al-Hijr, verses 43 and 44. وَإِنَّ جَهَنَّمَ لَمَوْعِدُهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ لَهَا 7 أَبْوَابٍ لِكُلِّ بَابٍ مِّنْهُمْ جُزْءٌ مَقْسُومٌ. And indeed, for all such, hell will be the promised place. It has 7 gates, and each gate has an appointed portion. So there's different gates, and there's different types of punishment. And the second answer, which is, I think, even stronger, is that in reality they will have no food at all. So, because tariq, this totally horrible tasting thorn tree, that hurts your mouth to eat and then, boils in your gut, and pus, and this zakum tree, none of those can rightfully be called food. And Shinqiti, he refers to an Arabic expression. The translation: so and so has no shade but the sun, and no dabba but the dabba of his clothes. Now, dabba originally meant anything with legs, and then in common usage, it came to refer to a riding animal, like a camel or a horse or a donkey. So he has no dabba, but the dabba of his clothes means lice, things crawling around. They have legs, they're crawling around on his clothes. So in other words, he has no riding animal. So he has no shade but the sun means he has no shade. And he has no riding animal but lice means he has no riding animal. And that's quite a compelling answer.